Welcome back to Harbour Unboxed, April Q&A Part 1. I've got Tim by my side, so you guys know we're going to be answering questions because it's also the Q&A series, and that's typically what we try to do for the Q&A series. But before we do, today's sponsor spot is brought to you by Thermal Grizzly and their new Duranaut High Performance Thermal Paste. Duranaut offers extreme long-term stability combined with outstanding thermal conductivity, and this has been achieved through a specially engineered silicon oil combined with aluminium microparticles and zinc oxide nanoparticles of various shapes. Duranaut isn't electrically conductive and won't harden over time. For best performance, you'll want to apply a very thin layer, and to help with this, included is the TG Spatula Pro. The spatula's revised design allows for increased pressure during application, making it easy to spread a thin, even layer of Duranaut. So for more information, please check the link in the video description. Alright, is Nvidia effectively giving up the low-end GPU market to AMD and Intel for customers who know about the limitations of an 8GB VRAM buffer? I mean, the low-end market's really just dead. So we thought it might be revived with the Arc B580, but that hasn't really been the case. $250 US for that product with 12GB of VRAM seemed really good. I mean, yeah, there's a couple of little niggles and issues, but $250, you could overlook those really, and it's still a great value product. In the current market, there's nothing that comes close. But as it stands right now, you're looking at more like $320 US over at Newegg for a B580. And then here in Australia, they're about the same price as an RTX 4060, a little bit more than an RX 7600, but both of those competing GPUs only have 8GB of VRAM. But you could have got a 7600 XT for just a little bit extra. So it doesn't make the Arc GPU terribly compelling. So I'm not really sure that Intel's really necessarily taking over there, or AMD. And we haven't even seen what AMD is going to do with the 9060 series. They've done 9600 before. So I think so's Nvidia. But yeah, the 9060 series, we'll just have to wait and see what AMD does there. And hopefully we don't get a very overpriced 8GB option, especially with the same name as a 16GB card. Hopefully there's something there that distinguishes, you know, one from the other, like they did with the 7600, like an XT type branding or something like that. So we'll just have to wait and see what they're going to do there. But at the moment, low-end affordable GPUs really are dead, I would say.
Yeah, I feel like Nvidia's, at least in that product segment, is really just resting on the GeForce brand that they've built up over all of these years. They don't seem to be overly concerned with providing a super compelling, great quality, low-end graphics card. And as you mentioned in your RTX 5060 Ti 8GB review, planned obsolescence really seems to be the name of the game with those low-end cards. Which, is that Nvidia giving up, or is that Nvidia making a deliberate strategy to try and get people who are only spending $300 US to upgrade within a couple of years? I would say very much so that that's giving up on doing what gamers want. Like, gamers are very clearly, well, I don't know whether they're telling them in terms of sales, because products like the RTX 4060 were very successful in the market. But if you look at feedback online from at least the enthusiast crowd, they're getting told the message: we don't want 8GB graphics cards, we don't want stagnation, we want actually usable, decent, low-end or mainstream graphics cards. I don't even think $300 is a particularly low-end card. It's still $300 US. So yeah, it just seems like they've moved from giving gamers what they want to now this brilliant strategy of either the upsell, so trying to really force you into thinking, well, you know, the 4060, 5060, they're not great products. If I want 16GB of GPU VRAM, I'm going to have to, instead of spend $300, spend a minimum of $430 US. And then, you know, is that 4060 Ti 16GB a good GPU in other ways? Not sure. Maybe I should be buying a 5070 Ti, in which case you suddenly looking at $750 US in air quotes GPU, right? So there's the upsell angle, there's the planned obsolescence angle, trying to make you upgrade sooner. I think those are deliberate strategies. So yeah, have they given up? I mean, the lack of competition's really forced them into doing that, or at least has allowed them to do that. So as you said, the 9060, what that does is going to dictate a lot of how successful a 5060 might end up being.
Yeah, at the most affordable end of the discrete GPU market, they still have the lion's share, the most amount of market share. So until that changes, they haven't really given up on it. They just don't care about it, and they're still selling GPUs anyway.
That's right. They don't have to do anything, right? Like, if people are still buying 4060s, the message that they're getting is, we are doing enough in this market that we don't really need to change anything. Gamers are just going to go back to it. And honestly, that's what Nvidia told us in the briefing for the 5060 series when they were telling us all that crap about how they weren't going to supply GPUs for reviews for whatever reason. Their reasoning was, these are popular GPUs and they're not meant for enthusiast gamers. So they're clearly just basically accepting that Nvidia thinks they'll just sell them to anyone. So that's what they're trying to do.
Yeah, which we knew to be the case, which is why 2 years ago we started to sound the alarm bell on this 8GB VRAM issue. The fact that it is holding back the gaming industry. We've heard from game developers that it's making it very difficult to release new games and optimize them for these older 8GB frame buffers, just holding everything back. So if it was a situation where people didn't buy an RTX 4060 because of the 8GB frame buffer and the 8GB version of the 4060 Ti, then we wouldn't have an 8GB version of the 5060 and 5060 Ti. They wouldn't exist. But that's the situation we find ourselves in. Hopefully we're getting to a point now where so many people agree that it's not enough VRAM and it does start to hurt sales, that for the next generation, which is years away at this point, that will have, well, I mean, we're so far behind the 8 ball here that when they do finally give us 12 or, God forbid, 16 gigabytes of VRAM on these more entry-level products, it's possibly going to be just enough for the lifespan of that product. We'll have to see. Of course, we do have next-generation consoles coming up around that time, so I imagine VRAM requirements are going to jump quite considerably, which could be problematic even for something like an RTX 5080. But anyway, that's all yet to be seen. We'll have to reevaluate that in a few years from now.
Yeah, hopefully we can see, or at least the gaming community will be able to force Nvidia to maybe release a super series where they just fully correct all of those issues a year from now. Or I think with the 2060 Super, that didn't come that long after the 2060. So maybe something like that we can, fingers crossed, and hope for. Do you think that recent tariffs will increase supply of GPUs and CPUs in Australian and European markets, or will manufacturers scale down production? So I guess this is the assumption that, the tariffs that have been talked about will apply to GPUs and CPUs, and all that seems to be a huge mess. We're not 100% sure exactly how much of an impact it's going to have. Will things be excluded? Huge mess. But if we assume that prices are suddenly going to skyrocket in the United States because of tariffs, what's going to happen? Well, I think it really depends. I think manufacturers probably will scale down production just because of how large the United States market is. So if that suddenly is written off, basically, people are just not willing to buy products at reasonable prices, then
unreasonable prices.
Well, unreasonable prices, but
I know what you mean.
I think that they're going to find it difficult to flood the market in other regions. So if they kept the production at the scale that they were, then suddenly products that they were expecting to sell for, let's say, $500, maybe they're not going to be able to get anywhere close to that because there's just not enough buyers for that particular product. Like, let's say you make a ton of 5070s at $550 US, and suddenly you can't sell those in the US anymore. You've got a whole bunch of them available. Well, now, how many people are willing to pay $550 US for a 5070? There's going to be some people in Europe and Australia willing to pay that price, but a lot of people just won't be, especially in Australia, where you can buy one at basically the local MSRP right now. So if there was more supply of that card into Australia, it would just sit on store shelves. And then you're starting to talk about companies producing cards below MSRP, trying to flood them out onto the markets, reduce prices, and companies really don't want to do that. So there could be this situation where there's a short-term issue where they've made too many cards because they're expecting them to sell them to the US. They now can't, so what are they going to do? Try put them out into other markets. But then after that, I would expect they would slow down the production and sort of go, well, we just can't sell as many of these cards now. We would be losing money selling them at a certain level, so we just can't do that. And so they would just reduce production and supply the markets as they have been going. Because I think a lot of what we've seen from Nvidia over the last couple of years is their unwillingness to make cards better and more affordable. They want things to go the other way. So if they had to make a 5070, a $400 GPU, that's not just going to have effects now, but is going to have a ripple effect let's say 2 years from now when they're launching the next generation, and suddenly people have seen, hey, but you sold a 5070 for $400. Why are you charging $550 for the 6070?
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to be willing to do that. They just won't supply the card, especially because they can make tons of money from AI. So that's what I don't know whether expect. It's more of a guess. That I guess is what would happen. So unfortunately, I don't think Europeans are going to be getting suddenly amazing value graphics cards, especially long term. But again, like the tariff situation is extremely volatile. We just don't really know what's happening. Who knows? We could be sitting here in 2 months from now and the tariffs have been completely changed or reversed. So just have to play that one day by day, really, see how the market's going and update you on a weekly or monthly basis. If a 16/32 gigabyte configuration for a GPU is a bit too big of a gap VRAM wise, would a 16/24 or 12/18 gigabyte one make more sense? So I guess the thinking with this question is, for example, you've got an RTX 5080 with 16 gigabytes, you then use the new 3 gigabyte GDDR7 chips to enable 24 gigabytes on that design. Alternatively, you've got the RTX 5070, 12 gigabytes. If you use the 3 gigabyte chips, you could bring it up to 18 gigabytes instead of 12 gigabytes. So that's theoretically the option instead of going all the way and giving people, the full doubling of VRAM, which I think on like a 5070, do you need 24 gigabytes on that sort of GPU? It's definitely would be better than 12, but it's well beyond what a $550 GPU needs at a minimum.
Yeah, there's a couple of issues because I see a lot of people trying to work out, we've seen it over the years, like, can we make GPUs with modules so you can upgrade the memory? Various different solutions have been proposed or at least, put out there. Could this solve the problem? And it's really attempts, and I get it from the viewer's perspective, it's attempts to solve a problem that need not exist or doesn't really exist. Like it's a almost artificially created problem. 8 gigabytes, for example, on GPUs in 2025 is just, it's ludicrous. It's laughably bad. We've had this for how long now? The memory's not that expensive. There's really no reason why, at this point in time, 16 gigabytes shouldn't be the minimum. And I'm not too concerned with the whole 16 to 32, is there a middle ground in there or what configurations should you use? It's more just, I think now if you're spending the kind of money you're spending on a graphics card, there's 12 gigabytes the minimum, 16. I think just go with 16 because that's definitely going to work on, especially these more entry-level products. That will be a satisfactory amount of VRAM for at least the next 2 to 3 years. Now, something like an RTX 5080 that's a bit more powerful and you tend to do a bit more with that. Not sure if 16 gigabytes is going to age particularly well in that product in, say, 3 years from now. That product, you could start looking at 24 gigabytes of VRAM as being a more suitable configuration. We'll probably see stuff like, the 4090, for example, aging much better than the 5080 will, just because of that VRAM buffer size. But at the low end, 8 gigabytes, 12 gigabytes, they really should just be 16. It's not super expensive. It really shouldn't be something that we're talking about. VRAM really should just be a non-issue. The cards just should have enough of it.
Yeah.
They should just be able to do everything that, it's all a bit silly.
And there's no technical limitation. Like all of these discussions about, let's change up the memory buses and change up the GDDR7 modules that are being used. That would make more sense if we're talking about some sort of technical issue with like a 5060 Ti where it was capped to 8 gigabytes for some reason and therefore you had to go to more exotic solutions to increase it. But that's just plainly not the case. First of all, they actually made a 16 gigabyte GPU, so it's proven to be a thing. It's more about, I guess the excuses in terms of cost and that sort of thing, like, it'll cut too much into the margins if a 5060 class product has 16 gigabytes. Like, well, it's not really consumers' problem. That is just what needs to be done. And maybe they could have been more memory bus and made it a bit easier for Nvidia to produce cards with better VRAM capacities on them. But we're not limited. Like, if you took a 5060 and you wanted to make that a 32 gigabyte GPU, that would be much more difficult. I think it'd basically be impossible. But that's not what we're talking about.
Well, the point with the 5060 Ti is that it's getting to the point where it's really scummy and it's a trap, like what we said, because people the only sort of half legitimate sort of criticism I've seen of our take on this is that they want a more affordable version of that GPU because maybe they're esports gamers or whatever, they don't need the VRAM. Okay, fair enough. That's not really our criticism of it either. It's more the fact that, first of all, they're just really closely priced. So if you are an esports gamer, I beg you, buy the 16 gigabyte version. Doesn't cost much more money, and it's going to have a much higher resale value in 2 years from now, certainly 3 years from now. So it's actually a better investment and a more capable card. You might find yourself in a year from now wanting to play or be able to use more of that VRAM buffer.
I think that's a big thing as well, is that you might believe that you've only going to play a couple of games on your graphics card. So you think, I'll just buy the 8 gig version because I know I play Fortnite. That's the game I play. But then how many times have we heard people who they largely stick to one game, but then they try out a couple of different things? You know, when Helldivers 2 came out at the start of, was it last year? That just came out of the blue, really. Lots of people that might have been an Overwatch gamer or a Valorant gamer or a Fortnite gamer jumped on board and sort of wanted to see, hey, what's this new thing like? Is this the game for me? Should I switch over? My friend group's switching over to that game. We're going to try it out for a couple of months. Now, if it turns out that at the end of 2025 or 2026, the next version of that sort of game, I'm not meaning Helldivers 3, but another popular multiplayer title, it turns out that it needs more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM to run, then you've screwed yourself over by buying the 5060 to 8 gigabyte card. Even though you've said at the start, I'm only ever going to play Fortnite, you just don't really know what's going to be coming out. You may see a game like, let's say, Grand Theft Auto 6 comes to PC and runs much better on cards with more than 8 gigabytes of VRAM, which is, I don't know, probably going to happen considering it's a next generation title and all of that. That's such a popular game that you see a lot of those multiplayer gamers giving it a try. Things like Cyberpunk as well. That might be the only single player game that someone plays in that year. The rest of the time they're playing Call of Duty or whatever. So you keep your options open by buying the card that has the adequate amount of VRAM. And I would never want to close off my options in that situation where my friend group might move across to a different game and I'm left out because my card runs the game like crap and I just don't enjoy playing it. So yes, there's really no angle I see that makes sense to sacrifice that little bit of money to get the lower VRAM amount.
Yeah, that's right. So that's our advice there. But then again, like the main problem we have is we've seen GPUs with the same name or very similar names with different VRAM configurations. And that's a little bit annoying, but historically hasn't been too problematic. But in this particular instance, you have one card that is very capable of even, upscaled 4K gaming at very relative, I was going to say very high frame rates. That's kind of a perspective thing. Let's say 80 to 90 FPS is achievable in a lot of games. And then you have one that even at 1080p in a lot of the newer single-player games struggles to use sort of the top-tier presets. You're looking at sort of more medium. Indiana Jones, for example, is, well, even at 1080p, you're stuck at medium in that game. So it's pretty crazy, the difference between the two GPUs. Very small price. You could quite easily buy the wrong one and get pretty well screwed over there and have to basically upgrade immediately. So not a good situation. They really, again, given how crazy the difference is between the two of them, they should have a different name, or at least be like 5060 Ti, and then the non-Ti is the 8 gigabyte model, which also happens to be the case, but it's a completely different GPU. So
I think it's different to when we saw, because I saw this criticism come up on your video, the comparison of this generation to something like RX 480, 4 and 8 gigabyte. Why wasn't there all this criticism back then? And that's simply because the 4 gigabyte RX 480 actually did work at the time that card was released. There were some games that, might have run a bit better on the 8 gigabyte model, but it really was not the case where you saw the 4 gigabyte card come to market and just not run the latest and greatest games at resolutions that card was capable of, settings the card was capable of. And there was a lot of discussion at that time of, the 4 gigabyte card is the better value card. It's going to run your games perfectly fine today, and it's going to be a little cheaper for you. You're going to save that $40 US, but the 8 gigabyte card is going to be the card with better longevity. And so it's just a completely different scenario. If it turns out that the 5060 Ti 8 gigabyte could run today's games, but there was a couple of examples maybe where the 16 gig card was a lot better, and you're trying to toss it up like, it's okay today, but then I'm going to get a bit more longevity with the 16 gig. That's when, it makes a lot of sense. But the problem that we're seeing is that it's obsolete straight away. It just doesn't run today's games well from the start, which is something that we really haven't seen before with these, dual VRAM configurations. And that's why it's the trap that you've been saying, and why a 484 gigabyte was not as much of a trap. You would have gotten at least 2 years, I would have said.
Yeah, it's probably more than that. It's probably like 3 to 4 years, really. But it was a long time, especially before it was really problematic.
Yeah, exactly. Most people speculate that the GPU prices are supposed to come down further. However, do you think that is the case? As Nvidia and AIB partners have no reason to lower prices because GPUs continue to sell out at ridiculous prices. Right now in Spain, you can find some MSRP models, as well as in the UK and Germany, but other models are overpriced, with prices, for example, 14 to 1800 euros for a 5080. So I think with a lot of the products that we're seeing now, you can pretty comfortably say that there is no supply of those products and prices are inflated and highly misleading, because usually what we like to see with launches is the MSRP being realized within 1 month, maybe 6 weeks after launch. That's a fairly typical time frame that is acceptable for manufacturers to get their act together and start supplying the market. We always expect that within the first couple of weeks, prices are going to be inflated. That happens every launch, especially for popular products. So now that we're sitting here, months after the launch of products like the RTX 5080, for example, and you cannot buy them for even close to the MSRP, pretty clearly is suggesting things like fake MSRP, misleading pricing, and that sort of thing. So there's that angle. So obviously, I think we can clearly look at the market and say, probably should have done better on that pricing angle. With that said, if you're looking outside of the US, which is kind of being destroyed a bit by tariffs and all that sort of situation, products are coming back into stock in other regions at bad prices, but then you check week after week and those bad prices get slightly less bad every time. So I checked, maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago in Australia, could not buy a 9070 XT at all, just fully sold out. Now you can buy them for around 1,300 Australian dollars in stock and have been in stock for a few weeks. Now, $1,300 Australian is still roughly 200 AUD over what it should be if it was an MSRP card, but you can now buy one. And similar with things like 5070 Ti. If we looked a month ago, you were looking at $1,800 1,800 Australian dollars plus. Now they're a little cheaper than that. So prices are improving, but it's clearly a very, very slow process at the moment. Just very much a lack of supply for some of these products, and obviously a lot of price gouging, price manipulation, AIBs wanting to cash in on the extreme demand for some of these products. So not the best situation, but as we talked about in things like our podcast, we do expect these products to have to be on the market for around 2 years. So I'd like to think that we are going to see the MSRP at some point in that time. And if you guys are continuing to refuse, for example, paying 1,400 euros for a 5080, which is fair enough because that's an awful price, if you continue to refuse, what are they going to do with the production? They can either cut production, I guess, or the cards that they made will have to be sold at a lower price. And I think that will be a factor for the cards with competition. So 9070 XT versus 5070 Ti. If one of the products is more attractive than the other, then that's going to take care of a lot of this. So yeah, not the best situation. Things are very slowly improving. Would have liked to have seen more improvement by this time, but it just seems like there's a lot of factors going on at the moment that are just preventing things from being good, which is unfortunate, but it is what it is. For people with still perfectly good CPUs on platforms with PCIe 3.0, so 8700K, 5700X3D, how much performance loss can we expect if purchasing a 5060 Ti with only 8 PCIe lanes? I've heard through the grapevine that it's around a 4% loss, so do you plan on testing it?
That's definitely something I'll look into testing. So the 4% thing is definitely true in the general sense. So it would be I expect it would be a 4% performance loss when working within the 8GB frame buffer. So that's just the performance hit there from less PCIe bandwidth. However, when I think the real critical difference is when you're just teetering on the edge and sometimes just dipping over, but even just a couple of megabytes, that's where the more limited PCIe bandwidth becomes quite devastating, which we clearly showed in a video with I think it was the 8GB RTX 4060 Ti. the PCIe 4.0 system often would smooth out some of those little glitches to the point where it wasn't super noticeable or even noticeable at all in some instances. PCIe 3.0 did become more noticeable, and then it was a complete disaster on PCIe 2.0. So it's going to be worse than 5.0, that's for sure. How much worse, hard to say. I think you're going to see you're definitely going to see more examples where the performance becomes, let's say, unplayable just due to poor frame time performance and that sort of stuff. So yeah, I might even get the 8700K out and do that exact configuration, or probably more for apples to apples, just turn the 9800X 3D down to PCIe 3.0 because, yeah, more apples to apples. But or I could do both. We'll see. But that's definitely one of the many comparisons I want to do in the near future. Seeing how Nvidia has successfully made the underwhelming 8GB version of the 5060 Ti, underwhelming's quite kind, I would have thought, mostly invisible to reviewers, apart from your coverage where you guys were, able to buy one. Do you think this blackout tactic will now become the normal practice for companies towards tech media? Creators like yourself who have a large following will be able to do this, so buy one. But smaller creators won't be able to because they won't have the budget and that sort of stuff. So what do you think will happen to independent reviews in the future? I don't think this is going to become too much of a common occurrence, just because I think companies generally want their products reviewed and it's a big part of the marketing push. So I think it won't happen often. But yeah, the blackout the less desirable ones, I think that's pretty much always happened anyway. Nvidia's released tons of dodgy GPU configurations, and AMD's had their fair share as well over the years, and they haven't really got review programs. They've been pushed out quietly. AMD loves to do the old China exclusive.
Mm-hmm.
Just get rid of all those defective dies with a dubious name and ship them off to China.
Re-release of the CPUs where you just change the name very slightly, downclock it by 100 megahertz or whatever, and that sort of thing. So
yeah, so it's not just Nvidia. Like, we're not just picking on Nvidia for this. We know AMD does it as well. I think this Nvidia version, though, is probably seen to be a bit more egregious because it is a mainstream global release that they really expect the majority of gamers to purchase. So that's why it's sort of come under so much scrutiny.
Mm-hmm.
But basically the plan, the answer is yes. Like, this was the plan. I think you said it in your news video that we suspected this was the plan. They were trying to bury the 8GB models because they're clearly very bad. The vast majority of reviews were going to be very critical of them. They saw this coming. A lot of other media outlets have been talking about how 8GB of VRAM is not enough, especially on a product around $400. I think a lot of them are selling for like $500 US at this point in time. So yeah, they knew that if they just didn't have a review program and they stopped AIBs, which they did definitely do, from being able to sample the cards ahead of release. In fact, no AIB to date has been able to sample me an 8GB card. They've just said they don't have availability, so I had to go buy it myself.
Even though they're selling them, which is funny.
So, I mean, this is what a lot of people really should be up in arms about, is the fact that, like, we've always gone after motherboard manufacturers when they've released garbage tier motherboards and we can't get them off them, and we've had to wait till they come into our region, buy it, and then show you guys how garbage it is. And that's essentially what Nvidia is doing here. They're saying, look, we know it's garbage, but we don't care. We want to roll gamers with this obsolete product that's going to be nothing but a headache for them. We're going to charge them good money for it, and we don't want you to tell them about it. And therefore, we're going to stop you from doing so as long as we can until you actually just become one of those gamers who goes out. I spent 720 Australian dollars, something like that, on an absolutely garbage product that I'm obviously not going to use outside of testing because 8GB of VRAM, it's completely useless to me. And it's a shame because the 16GB version of the 5060 Ti is quite a good product. Now, price dependent on how great it is in terms of value, but in terms of usability, it is a fantastic product. It works very well. As I showed, 4K upscaled gaming is a reality. So anyway, that was the plan and it worked because I haven't seen too many 8GB graphics card reviews because, again, how many reviewers want to go out and buy a useless graphics card for probably what amounts to about $500 US?
Yeah, not many. I think I'd like to sit here as a reviewer and say companies are supplying review units of products out of the goodness of their heart because they believe in the review feedback process, which I'm sure is true in some cases, but largely reviews are seen as a marketing tool. That's why companies provide products ahead of time. It's because they believe in the product, they think it's good, they believe it's going to get positive coverage and feedback, and that will encourage people to buy it. And that benefits the reviewers, it benefits the community as well, and it all kind of works nicely together. The company benefits from people knowing about the product, we benefit because we can evaluate it independently and fairly, and you guys benefit because you then get correct, accurate information about the product. And that's, everyone benefits, works nicely. But if a company doesn't believe in the product, the whole thing sort of falls apart, because we would still benefit from reviewing it. You guys would still benefit from getting the information, but the company no longer benefits because they know the product sucks. They know it's going to hurt the sales. And so they've got no interest in doing it. And so that's really a key factor with this particular release, is that if Nvidia was confident the product was good, there would be a review program. There's no doubt about it. If they thought the 5060 was going to get good reviews, was going to be a big seller, people have high interest in it, absolutely they would be sampling it. They would allow people to release the reviews ahead of the launch. They would actually have a firm release date. It would be a normal review program. And so my advice to people when they see these sorts of things, and if it's reported on for any industry, is if you see a company who is not willing to sample a product for whatever reason. This could be a game. This could be another, like a motherboard, as you sort of brought up. They're not willing to sample it. It means they don't believe in the product. Now, some companies are probably going to come back and say, for some products, we just don't have stock, or we're not running review programs or whatever. Those are excuses, in my opinion. Every company should be willing to sample, or at least have some sort of review process or announcement process for all products that they believe in. And so again, like if you see a game and the game developers are like, hey guys, we're not supplying game reviewers keys for these ahead of the release, they're just going to be getting access when everyone else gets access to buy it. Again, you should be extremely, extremely suspicious of that. There's very likely a company that knows, or has done internal testing or something along those lines, knows that it is not a quality product, or is not going to get the reception that they're after. There are some exceptions to this, of course, but I'm generalizing here when I say this. But I can think of very few examples where we've asked for products, or a specific product that has no review program. It's especially at the lower part of the stack, and that product is a great product that's worth talking about. It just doesn't happen that often. So if this happens again, if we report, let's say there's a 6060 coming out in 2 years, we say there's no review program for this product, again, alarm bells should be ringing in your ears, and you should be seeing through that, basically, of what's happening. So like I said, like you sort of said, if a company believes in a product, which it seems like Nvidia believes in their high-end products, they will likely continue doing review programs. I don't think we'll be seeing like a 6070 with no review program. It's probably going to still be the same case as what we've seen this time around. So yeah, that's basically it with this. They didn't believe in it. That's it.
All right, we're going to hit pause there on part one. Part two coming up when Balin gets around to editing it. He's a bit slow, so it'll probably be a few days after this one. But
brutal.
we don't want to whip the video editor too hard. A little bit, but not too hard. So we'll give him like 2-day grace. That seems
okay. Yeah, fair enough.
I think everyone will agree that's perfectly acceptable. You happy with that, Balin?
I can deal with that.
He said, "You guys are the best and I love you." So that's a nice message. Anyway, that's it for part one. Thanks for watching. If you'd like to support the channel more directly, we have the join button or Patreon. Signing up to either one of those gives you access to our exclusive Discord server. Pretty cool place. Tim loves talking about monitors there. We also have behind the scenes content, Q&A stuff. And there's one other thing, isn't there? What am I forgetting?
Live streams? Did you
we do
mention that?
live streams, yes. We actually have to do one of them later today, so a bit weird that I forgot about that, but thanks for reminding me. All right, I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim.
See you next time.